So here at our modern Sunset project, could we have a 20-foot retaining wall? Are there areas where we don't need a retaining wall? I'm standing here at part of the parking area with an 8-foot wall. Why is it 8 feet? Stay tuned, let's get started. One of the big parts about any hillside is retaining walls, and this has become increasingly more difficult, at least with City of Scottsdale, as you look at a hillside build. Now, what Scottsdale essentially wants is they really don't want tiered, and what that means is that you have steps, right? So you're stepping up the hillside with multiple masonry structures that are retaining the hill. They do require that if you do tiered, and they do approve it in some cases, that the width between the vertical has to be the same as the vertical. So what that means is if we have an 8-foot wall, tall, retaining, we have to go 8 feet in width, and then we can go up 8 feet again, right? And that creates that nice step down effect. Again, they don't want to just see masonry unit, right? They want this to be beautiful onto the hillside. And in this case, we had to work with them, and this took a lot of work with our civil engineering team and our architect, because they didn't want a ton of hillside. They didn't want a ton of retaining walls. I've had clients ask me in the past, they said, hey Brad, you know, with our hillside, we want as much space as possible, right? Because if you think about that tiered aspect, that's every horizontal amount that has to match that vertical amount now is encroaching onto the property. So clients will be like, hey, I just want to do a 20-foot wall because now I have this massive, you know, backyard or driveway or entry living space. The city will never allow that. And there's a couple reasons. One, the visual aspect, right? They don't want to see some 20-foot masonry wall, even if you put stone on it. It just, they don't like how that looks in the hillside or even at the front of the house, you know, whether it's the front of the house or the back of the house where the pool is. Second thing is you think about strength, right? From our standpoint, you know, you think about waterproofing, water coming down, erosion, you know, the weight of holding back a hillside, you know, that can create a lot of instability there with that big of a retaining wall. So the city really makes us coordinate and say, okay, in this case, you can see they said a max of 8 feet. We have a couple that are a little taller, but they only wanted one tier. And so they did allow us a couple areas where it's a little bit taller, but we could only have one tier. And so that meant that we had to be really creative with where we set the house. And what that means is you can see how steep it gets up here up the hill. There's a big drop off here on the back side of the house. And so based on this mountain, we had to find an exact location that essentially with cut and fill of the house and keeping a single story, that we would only do essentially an 8-foot retaining wall, which we have here. One of the other requirements is what we see up here on this side of the hill. So one thing that the city did not want is one continuous retaining wall all the way along the length of the driveway. They wanted to break that up. So you can see here, these boulders we brought in. So all of these boulders you see here have been installed manually. So we had a design with our civil engineer and with our landscape architect, and then our boulder company came out with a crane, set each of these boulders, they put them here, and this is essentially retaining the hillside. Now, we are still gonna have here a little barrier here that's gonna prevent some of the runoff and erosion because, you know, you don't want all this dirt washing down into the driveway. So we will have that part covered here to give that support and still break up the hillside without one continuous retaining wall. And that was key, and you can see here the waterproofing, you know, the tough and dry system that we use. And so this, we have capillary breaks, which means that our footing, when we pour the footing, we pour that capillary break, that membrane, on top of the footing. So as we go vertical, you're essentially creating a seal so that, you know, masonry, concrete, stucco tends to wick water vertical. And so by having a capillary break, now any water that hits the footing or coming down the hillside can't be wicked or soaked up into the masonry wall, which can weaken it. It creates calcium deposits, efflorescence, you know, all these things that don't look great as well as structurally are not great for the wall. And then by putting the waterproof membrane, by putting the pad there as we're backfilling, the hills coming in, it doesn't penetrate that waterproofing. So again, a lot of coordination here with the retaining walls. We went through civil a few times. Fortunately, we had an amazing architectural design and civil team to coordinate this and execute this at this level to really retain this entire hillside at only 8 feet at the maximum to still give these amazing views of this modern hill.